Picture this. Archaeologists are carefully excavating an ancient Egyptian tomb, dust, stone, silence, when they stumble across something that stops them cold. Not gold, not jewels. Food. Honey, to be exact, sitting in sealed clay pots for over 3,000 years. And here's the part that still blows people's minds. It was still edible, still perfectly preserved. No refrigeration, no preservatives, no technology at all. That single discovery tells us something incredibly important about food that most people have never stopped to think about. Some foods are almost indestructible, and knowing which ones they are could be one of the most practical decisions you ever make for yourself and your family. Here's what most people do when they think about emergency food prep. They go online, they see a YouTube thumbnail with a tactical backpack and a guy in camouflage, they click, and 20 minutes later they're looking at a $1,000 bucket of freeze-dried meals they'll never actually use. That's not preparedness, that's marketing. What actually works, what FEMA and the USDA have been quietly recommending for decades based on real research and real disaster response data, is far simpler, far cheaper, and already sitting on supermarket shelves right now. In this video, we're walking through 15 government-backed foods that form the foundation of a real, functional emergency pantry. You'll learn exactly what they are, why they work, how to store them correctly, and how to build a system that protects your family through anything, whether that's a hurricane, a job loss, a supply chain disruption, or just a rough month. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear picture of exactly where to start. Welcome to Food Decider. If you're new here, this is where smart food decisions actually get made. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's get into it. Governments don't think about emergency food the way survivalists do. They're not planning for bunkers or off-grid fantasy scenarios. They're planning for average families, average kitchens, average budgets, and what will realistically keep those families healthy and functional when normal systems break down. That's a very different calculation, and the results of that calculation are quietly, consistently the same 15 foods that have shown up on preparedness lists for decades. Not long ago, FEMA's official recommendation was a 72-hour food supply, 3 days. That seemed reasonable until a series of major disasters, hurricanes, wildfires, ice storms, a global pandemic, made it painfully obvious that 3 days is nowhere near enough. Supply chains buckle faster than anyone expects. Grocery stores empty out in hours. Roads close. Power goes out. 3 days becomes 3 weeks, becomes 3 months. The recommendation has since been updated to at least 2 weeks, but experienced preparedness planners will tell you that 3 months is where real security starts, and a full year is where peace of mind lives. But building toward that doesn't mean spending a fortune overnight. It means understanding which foods work hardest for you, foods that store for years or even decades, foods that deliver serious nutrition at minimal cost, foods that you can actually cook and eat when conditions aren't ideal. And it starts with understanding one fundamental principle. In an emergency, adequacy beats perfection every single time. You don't need the most nutritious food. You need food that's there when you need it, food you can prepare, and food that keeps you functional. With that principle in mind, let's look at the first group of foods that make all of this possible. White rice might be the single most underrated food in the world of emergency preparedness. Not brown rice, white rice. Brown rice has more nutrients, yes, but it also has natural oils in the bran layer that cause it to go rancid over time. White rice, because that bran layer has been removed, contains almost no fat, and without fat, there's nothing to spoil. Stored correctly in sealed mylar bags with oxygen absorbers inside a cool, dark space, white rice will remain perfectly edible for 30 years or more. 30 years. That is not a typo. At roughly 1,600 calories per pound and a cost of less than $1 per pound in most places, white rice has a price-to-calorie ratio that nothing else can touch. A 50-pound bag of white rice, stored correctly, can provide thousands of meals across a long emergency. It's bland on its own, yes, but that's what the rest of this list solves. Pasta operates on a similar principle. It's a wheat-based carbohydrate that stores for 25 to 30 years when sealed away from moisture and oxygen, and cooks faster than rice, which matters enormously when you're trying to conserve fuel. Different pasta shapes also create a sense of variety in meals that helps people psychologically over long periods. We'll come back to that point because it's more important than most people realize. For now, understand that pasta and rice together give you a serious redundant carbohydrate base that covers both speed and volume. Oats round out the grain family beautifully. Rolled oats specifically hit a sweet spot that whole oat groats don't quite reach. They require minimal preparation, cook quickly, have an impressive shelf life of up to 30 years when stored with oxygen absorbers, and they are remarkably versatile. Oats are a breakfast staple, a baking ingredient, a thickener for soups and stews, a base for homemade granola bars. The beta-glucan fiber in oats supports digestive health and keeps you feeling full, both critical during a period when meal frequency might be reduced and stress is elevated. Then there's cornmeal, which gets nearly enough credit. Cornmeal is gluten-free, which matters both for dietary reasons and for variety. Mixing up your grain sources keeps meals feeling different. Even cornbread, polenta, tortillas, muffins, porridge. Cornmeal can be transformed into a surprising range of foods with nothing more than water, salt, and heat. Degerminated cornmeal, the variety you'll find on most supermarket shelves, stores longer than whole grain versions because the germ has been removed along with its perishable oils. Store it sealed, away from moisture, and it will serve you well. Now, calories keep you alive, but protein keeps you functional. And the protein options on this list are where emergency food storage starts to look genuinely impressive. Dried beans are one of the most nutritionally complete foods you can store. Black beans, pinto beans, kidney beans, navy beans, chickpeas, lentils, all of them provide serious amounts of protein, fiber, and complex carbohydrates. They store for 25 to 30 years when kept dry and free of oxygen. And here's the piece that surprises most people. Rice and beans eaten together form a complete protein. They provide all 9 essential amino acids that the human body cannot produce on its own. That means even if animal products are completely unavailable, rice and beans together give your body what it needs to repair tissue, support immune function, and maintain muscle. For the price of a few dollars per pound, that is extraordinary nutritional value. Lentils deserve a special mention within the bean family. Unlike most dried beans, lentils require no soaking and cook in under 30 minutes. When you're dealing with limited fuel, whether that's propane, firewood, or a small camp stove, cooking time is currency. Lentils spend that currency efficiently. Peanut butter occupies a unique position on this list because it requires absolutely no preparation. Open the jar, eat. In an emergency where cooking isn't possible, during the first hours or days of a sudden disruption, that immediacy matters. Beyond convenience, peanut butter provides a concentrated source of fat and protein that delivers slow-burning, sustained energy. Fat is often underestimated in emergency food planning. Your body needs fat for hormone production, for absorbing fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, and for brain function. Commercial peanut butter, the kind with stabilizers and hydrogenated oils, lasts significantly longer than natural peanut butter, up to 2 years at room temperature, often longer. Store it in a cool, dark place, and it will be ready when you need it. Canned fish, tuna, salmon, sardines, mackerel, anchovies, brings ready-to-eat complete protein to the pantry with a shelf life of 3 to 5 years. No cooking required, no preparation beyond opening a can. Sardines in particular are nutritional powerhouses. The small, soft bones are completely edible and deliver a meaningful amount of calcium, which becomes critical in a long emergency where dairy is unavailable. Omega-3 fatty acids from canned fish support brain health, reduce inflammation, and support cardiovascular function, all things that matter during prolonged physical and mental stress. Rotating through different varieties also provides welcome flavor variety. Powdered eggs might sound unappetizing if you've never used them, but they perform remarkably well in practice. One large can of powdered eggs can contain the equivalent of 70 to 100 whole eggs, and they store for 5 to 10 years. They scramble, they bake, they bind. Everything fresh eggs do in a kitchen, powdered eggs can replicate. Solving the breakfast problem is more important than it sounds. Breakfast is a psychological anchor. Starting a stressful day with a familiar, protein-rich meal creates a sense of normalcy that matters enormously over time. Powdered milk completes the protein picture. It stores for 20 or more years, provides calcium, protein, and vitamin D, and works seamlessly in baking, cooking, and as a reconstituted drink. For households with children, this is non-negotiable. For adults, it fills critical nutritional gaps that become pronounced over a long emergency. It won't taste quite like fresh milk, but reconstituted in recipes, it performs almost identically. Here's something that most preparedness guides miss entirely. There's a category of foods that don't just feed you, they enable everything else in your pantry. They preserve other foods, they add flavor to bland staples, they provide medicinal value, and they essentially never expire. These are the multipliers, and 3 of them sit at the absolute top of any serious emergency food list. Honey is first, and it's first for a reason. That Egyptian honey wasn't a fluke. Honey's extraordinary longevity comes from a combination of factors: extremely low moisture content that prevents bacterial growth, natural acidity, and enzymes produced by bees that generate small amounts of hydrogen peroxide, a natural antimicrobial compound. Stored in a sealed container away from moisture, and honey is effectively immortal. But honey's value in an emergency goes far beyond sweetness. The simple sugars in honey, glucose and fructose, are already partially broken down, which means they enter the bloodstream almost immediately. If you're physically exerting yourself during a crisis, if you're cold, if your blood sugar is dropped, honey provides fast, accessible energy in a way that almost nothing else can match. And its antibacterial properties, which were used in hospitals for wound treatment long before antibiotics were developed and are still used in specialized wound care today, become critically important if medical supplies are unavailable. Store honey in glass if possible, since it can absorb compounds from plastic over very long periods. Crystallization is completely normal and doesn't indicate spoilage. Gently reheating the jar in warm water restores its liquid consistency. Salt does not expire, ever. Pure salt, sodium chloride, is a stable mineral compound that cannot decay. It can absorb moisture from the air, which is why it clumps, but that doesn't affect it. In terms of emergency preparedness, salt does 3 things that nothing else can replicate. It preserves food, it seasons food, and it supports the electrolyte balance your body needs to function, particularly during physical exertion or illness involving fluid loss. The ability to cure meat, pickle vegetables, and ferment foods, all of which extend the usable life of fresh ingredients dramatically, rests almost entirely on salt. 25 pounds of iodized salt costs around $10 and provides essentially unlimited preservation capacity for years. Store pure, additive-free salts like canning salt or kosher salt specifically for food preservation, and iodized table salt for regular consumption to support thyroid health. Vinegar, like honey and salt, does not expire. White distilled vinegar has an indefinite shelf life and serves multiple functions simultaneously. It is the foundation of pickling, the technique of preserving vegetables in acidified brine that extends their edible life from days to months or even years. It sanitizes surfaces and equipment without requiring commercial cleaning products, and it brightens the flavor of bland foods in a way that transforms eating from a mechanical necessity into something approaching enjoyment. Apple cider vinegar adds additional culinary complexity and is worth storing alongside white vinegar for variety. Together, these 3 foods form an invisible infrastructure layer that multiplies the value of everything else in your pantry. Salt and vinegar together can preserve virtually any vegetable harvest. Honey can treat minor wounds and provide fast energy when nothing else is available, and all 3 cost almost nothing. Understanding how these foods interact with each other is what separates a random collection of canned goods from a genuine food storage system. The rice and beans complete protein pairing is the most important example. Neither rice nor beans alone provides all 9 essential amino acids. Together, they do. This means that across a long emergency where meat and eggs are unavailable, a person eating rice and beans in combination is still meeting their fundamental protein needs. Building meals from a limited pantry becomes an almost creative exercise once you understand what you're working with. Rice cooked in bouillon broth, topped with canned fish, accompanied by pickled vegetables made from vinegar and salt, oatmeal sweetened with honey and dried fruit, pasta with canned tomatoes and olive oil, bean stew seasoned with salt and spices, cornbread made from cornmeal, powdered eggs, and powdered milk. These aren't survival rations. These are real meals made entirely from shelf-stable ingredients that cost a fraction of specialty survival food. But none of this works if the storage itself fails, and this is where a lot of well-intentioned preparedness efforts fall apart. Moisture and oxygen are the two enemies of long-term food storage. Moisture creates the conditions for mold, bacterial growth, and insect infestation. Oxygen enables oxidation, the chemical process that causes fats to go rancid, colors to fade, and nutritional value to degrade. Controlling both requires airtight containers and oxygen absorbers. Mylar bags inside food-grade buckets with oxygen absorbers, removed as much ambient air as possible before sealing, represent the gold standard for long-term dry goods storage. For items you're actively rotating and using, airtight glass or food-grade plastic containers work well. Rotation is not optional. It is the operating principle of a functional pantry. The system that works is the one where you're actively eating your stored food, replenishing it, and continuously refreshing the stock. First in, first out. Oldest items used first, newest items placed at the back. This approach means your food never actually expires in practice, because it never gets the chance to reach its expiration date before you've already used it. Overbuying all at once is a surprisingly common mistake. Buying a year's worth of food overnight creates several problems. It exceeds most people's budgets, it creates a storage organization challenge, and it bypasses the learning process of actually rotating and using stored food. Building gradually, adding a few extra items each shopping trip, means the system develops organically and sustainably. One consideration that catches many people off guard is the preparation requirement for certain foods. Beans, rice, and pasta all require water and heat to cook. In a scenario where utilities are disrupted, that means having a backup cooking source, a propane camp stove, a charcoal grill, a wood fire, and having stored water on hand. Plan for this explicitly. The food is only useful if you can prepare it. There is a dimension of emergency food preparedness that almost never gets discussed in practical guides, and it's the one that arguably determines whether a family genuinely copes well or slowly deteriorates over a long emergency. That dimension is psychological, and food sits right at the center of it. Human beings are not purely mechanical. We don't just need calories and macronutrients to survive difficult situations. We need routine, we need comfort, we need the sensory experience of a meal that feels like a meal rather than a chore. We need, to put it plainly, food that we actually want to eat. After 2 weeks of unseasoned rice and plain beans, the psychological toll becomes a real and measurable problem. People become irritable, they lose motivation, they eat less than they need because the food feels punishing. Particularly for children, familiar flavors and small comforts can be the difference between a manageable situation and a traumatic one. This is why dried fruit belongs on this list. Raisins, dried apricots, dried apples, cranberries, dried mango, they store for 1 to 2 years easily, and commercially prepared versions. As someone who has been eating plain staple foods for days or weeks, a handful of dried apricots tastes like dessert. The psychological lift is real and significant. Beyond morale, dried fruit delivers vitamins, fiber, and fast-acting natural sugars that support energy levels. For children especially, having something sweet and familiar available provides an emotional anchor during uncertainty. Bouillon cubes and powdered broth occupy a similar psychological space, but they solve the problem from a completely different angle. Their nutritional contribution is modest, mostly sodium, a small amount of flavor compounds, but their impact on meal quality is enormous. A pot of plain rice cooked in water is one experience. That same rice cooked in savory chicken broth with a small amount of salt and dried herbs is an entirely different meal. Bouillon cubes that last 2 to 3 years stored in a dry place cost almost nothing and do more for long-term meal sustainability than almost any other item on this list. They are, in the most literal sense, a morale investment. Instant coffee fits this same category. The nutritional value is essentially zero. The psychological value, for the large portion of adults who structure their morning around a cup of coffee, is immense. Routine is a coping mechanism. In the middle of a disruption, being able to brew a familiar cup of coffee, to have that small, reliable pleasure first thing in the morning, creates a sense of normalcy and control that genuinely helps people function. Don't dismiss the morale foods. They're part of the system. Now let's address something that most emergency preparedness content gets quietly, fundamentally wrong. The assumption built into most prepping content is that you're preparing for a dramatic, large-scale disaster, a hurricane, a grid-down event, a societal collapse. And while those things do happen, they're not the emergencies that actually disrupt most people's lives most of the time. The real emergencies are ordinary: a sudden job loss, an unexpected medical bill that drains savings in a week, a car breaking down the same month that the heating system fails, a regional supply chain disruption that empties grocery shelves for 10 days, a winter storm that makes leaving the house impossible. These are the situations that a month's worth of stored food handles quietly and completely. They're not glamorous scenarios, which is exactly why they don't make good YouTube thumbnails, but they happen constantly to normal people in normal circumstances. Having a month of food stored in your pantry means that a job loss becomes a stressful situation rather than a crisis. It means that when the grocery store shelves are empty during a storm, you're already home with everything you need. It means that a medical emergency that wipes out discretionary income for a month doesn't also mean going hungry. The food storage system isn't waiting for the apocalypse. It's working quietly in the background of ordinary life, providing a buffer against ordinary disruptions. This reframing is important because it changes the psychology of preparedness itself. If you're preparing for civilizational collapse, preparedness can feel paranoid, anxiety-inducing, all-consuming. But if you're building a pantry buffer against the real, statistically likely disruptions of normal life, job loss, illness, weather events, supply hiccups, then preparedness is just practical household management. It's insurance that you keep in your kitchen instead of paying a monthly premium for. And like all good insurance, once it's in place, you stop thinking about it. The quiet confidence it provides is real. Building a system that actually works starts with letting go of the idea that you need to do it all at once. The most reliable and sustainable approach is the incremental one. Start with whatever you already have: a few cans of beans in the back of the pantry, a bag of rice, a jar of peanut butter on sale. That's a foundation. Every time you go shopping, add a few extra items to the cart: an extra can of tuna, a bag of lentils, a jar of honey, an extra box of pasta. None of these purchases are significant individually. Collectively, over weeks and months, they build something substantial. The rotation principle keeps the system alive. Use your oldest stored items in regular meals. Cook beans from your stock. Make rice from your emergency pantry for a Tuesday dinner. Replace what you use. This keeps the food perpetually fresh, prevents waste, and, importantly, keeps you familiar with how to prepare these foods. The worst time to learn how to cook dried beans from scratch is during an actual emergency. 6 months of consistent, incremental building will transform a standard kitchen pantry into a genuinely resilient food system. Not a survivalist bunker, not a fantasy prepper supply, just a well-stocked, rotating pantry that can handle most of what life is likely to throw at a typical household. That's the goal. That's the system that actually works. Honey from an ancient Egyptian tomb, 3,000 years and still good. Think about what that means when you apply it to the 15 foods on this list. Foods that cost almost nothing, store for decades, and give your family a quiet, powerful foundation of security that no subscription service or specialist supplier can match. The journey of 1,000 meals really does begin with a single can of beans. Start there. Add one thing at a time. Build steadily. And know that whatever tomorrow brings, your family will eat and your family will be fine. If this video gave you something useful, leave a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who could use this information. Subscribe to Food Decider so you don't miss what's coming next.